Technically, the Devil's Bible, also formerly known as the Codex Gigas, is what we consider to be the largest illuminated manuscript that we have on record.
In a Swedish vault behind bulletproof glass sits a book so massive that 2 people are needed just to lift it. For 800 years, this manuscript has driven men to madness, survived fires that should have destroyed it, and kept secrets that scholars still cannot explain. They call it the Devil's Bible. And the most terrifying part is not the giant portrait of Satan staring out from its pages. The most terrifying part is that everything about its creation is impossible. The Impossible Book. Something extraordinary exists in the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. The Codex Gigas stands nearly 3 feet tall, measures 20 inches wide, and weighs exactly 165 pounds. To put that in perspective, this single book weighs more than most adult humans. The pages alone required the skins of 160 animals to create, most likely calves, though some accounts insist they came from donkeys. Each enormous sheet measures almost 3 feet by 20 inches, making this the largest medieval manuscript ever created. But the size is only the beginning of the mystery. The Codex Gigas contains 310 surviving leaves, which means 620 pages of densely packed text and haunting illustrations. Originally, there were 320 leaves, but somewhere in history, 12 pages were deliberately cut out, not damaged, not burned. Someone took a blade and carefully removed them, and nobody knows exactly what those missing pages contained. The book's origins trace back to a small Benedictine monastery called Podlajice, nestled in the mountains of 13th century Bohemia in what is now the Czech Republic. This monastery was so poor and so small that scholars at the National Library of Sweden have openly stated it was far too impoverished to undertake such a massive project. And yet somehow this impossible book emerged from those humble walls. According to legend, a monk at this monastery committed a terrible sin. Some accounts say he broke his sacred vows. Others whisper of darker transgressions that the historical record deliberately obscures. Whatever his crime, his brothers sentenced him to the most horrifying punishment imaginable in the medieval world. They would brick him up alive inside a wall and leave him to suffocate in absolute darkness. This punishment was real. Archaeologists have found skeletons of people immured inside monastery walls, some with tables and candles beside them, suggesting they were left to slowly starve rather than suffocate. In 1409, 4 clerics in Augsburg were locked inside wooden coffins and left to die for their crimes. The Latin phrase that signaled this sentence was simple and chilling. Vade in pace, go in peace. Facing certain death, the condemned monk made a desperate bargain with his brothers. If they spared his life, he would create something that would bring glory to the monastery forever. He would write a single book containing all human knowledge, the complete Bible, works of history and philosophy, medical treatises. Everything the medieval world understood about existence would be bound between 2 covers. There was only one problem. He promised to complete this impossible task in a single night. Even the most skilled medieval scribe, working without pause for sleep or food, would need decades to produce such a manuscript. The National Library of Sweden has calculated that the text alone would require 5 years of work at 6 hours per day, 6 days per week. What this monk promised was physically impossible for any human being to accomplish. The Condemned Monk's Bargain. As midnight approached and desperation consumed him, the monk realized he could never fulfill his promise through human effort alone, and so he called out to the one being he believed could help him. He summoned the devil himself. According to the legend that has remained virtually unchanged since the Middle Ages, the devil answered the monk's desperate prayer. The bargain was simple and terrible. Satan would grant the monk supernatural speed and endurance to complete the Codex Gigas before dawn. In exchange, the monk would surrender his immortal soul. But the devil demanded something more. He insisted that his own image be included in the manuscript, preserved forever among the Holy Scriptures. The monk's fellow brothers reported hearing strange sounds that night, whispered voices in languages that seemed older than human speech, the scratch of a quill moving across parchment far too quickly, and occasionally what sounded like 2 beings conversing in the darkness. When dawn broke and the brothers entered the cell, they found the monk collapsed over the completed manuscript. His eyes were wild. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He muttered the same phrase over and over again. The devil watches over the codex, and it watches him in return. He died 3 days later, never speaking coherently again. This is the legend. But when modern scholars began examining the Codex Gigas with scientific tools, they discovered something that made the supernatural story seem almost plausible. English paleographer Michael Gullick conducted the definitive handwriting analysis of the entire manuscript. His conclusion was absolute. One person wrote the entire Codex Gigas from the first page to the last. This alone is remarkable for a book that would take decades to complete. But the truly unsettling discovery was what the handwriting did not show. When a scribe works over months or years, their handwriting naturally changes. It shows signs of aging, of illness, of fatigue. A scribe's mood affects how they form letters. Changes in ink batches create variations in color and flow. Over decades of work, these accumulated differences create what historians call the human signature of authenticity. The Codex Gigas has no human signature. From the first page to the last, the handwriting remains unnervingly identical. The letter formations show no degradation, no evolution, no variation that would indicate the passage of years. The spacing is mechanically precise. The ink color stays absolutely uniform throughout 620 pages of text. Gullick noted that the Codex shows no signs of age, disease, or mood affecting the hand across what must have been decades of work. The nature of the writing is unchanged throughout the entire manuscript. It is as if the whole book emerged from a single continuous moment of creation. The 2008 National Geographic documentary subjected the Codex to ultraviolet fluorescence imaging and systematic comparison across all sections. The researchers confirmed what Gullick had found: one hand, one ink, perfect consistency across 30 years of work that appears to have taken no time at all. But the handwriting analysis was only the beginning of the mystery. When researchers turned to page 290, they encountered something that has disturbed viewers for 800 years. The impossible evidence. Turn to folio 290 of the Codex Gigas, and you will find yourself face to face with the largest medieval portrait of Satan ever created. The figure stands nearly 20 inches tall, dominating the entire page in vivid colors that remain striking after 8 centuries. This is not the cartoonish devil of popular culture with his red skin and pitchfork. This devil is something else entirely. The figure squats in a frontal position with both arms raised, trapped between 2 barren towers in an empty landscape. His head is dark green with thick curls forming a cap over his skull. Large red horns sprout from his forehead. His ears end in red points. His eyes are small with red pupils, opened wide and staring directly at the viewer no matter where they stand in the room. His mouth hangs open, revealing small white teeth and 2 long red tongues that fork like a serpent. Each hand has only 4 fingers ending in enormous red claws. Each foot has only 4 toes with the same terrible talons. Around his waist, he wears a loincloth made of white ermine, the fur of royalty marked with comma-shaped dashes of red. This detail emphasizes his title as the Prince of Darkness. He is depicted as royalty, but royalty of hell. What makes this portrait truly disturbing is not just its size or its detail. Medieval manuscripts that depicted devils typically surrounded them with protective imagery. Angels would flank the demon, crosses would contain its power, holy text would explicitly condemn the evil figure. These protections made demonic images safe for Christian eyes. The devil in the Codex Gigas has no such protection. Instead, he is surrounded by vast expanses of blank parchment, empty space that draws the eye inevitably toward the central figure. There is nowhere else to look. The layout forces direct confrontation between the viewer and Satan himself. On the facing page, folio 289, the artist painted the only other full-page illustration in the entire manuscript. This image depicts the heavenly city of Jerusalem, as described in the Book of Revelation. Red walls enclose tiers of buildings and towers, filled with structures and life where the devil's realm stands empty. These 2 pages were designed to be viewed together. Heaven on one side, hell on the other, the choice laid bare before every reader. The psychological impact of this pairing has been documented for centuries. One account from 1858 describes a royal library caretaker who was trapped overnight with the manuscript. He claimed to see books climbing down from shelves and floating through the air in a whirling dance around the devil's Bible. When they found him in the morning, he was cowering under a table, and according to the account, he was and remained feeble-minded for the rest of his life. But the devil's portrait was not the darkest secret the Codex contained. Hidden among its pages were instructions for practices that the Church explicitly condemned, knowledge that no holy book should possess. The forbidden knowledge. The Codex Gigas contains the complete Latin Vulgate Bible, but arranged in an unusual order that differs from standard biblical organization. The Old Testament fills the first 118 folios. The New Testament appears much later, on folios 253 through 286. Between them lies something unexpected. The manuscript includes the complete works of Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian whose accounts of ancient Israel remain essential historical sources. It contains all 20 books of the Etymologiae by Isidore of Seville, the medieval encyclopedia covering everything from theology and grammar to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and geography. It preserves the Chronica Bohemorum by Cosmas of Prague, the earliest written history of Bohemian lands. 13 folios contain medical treatises derived from Hippocrates and Galen, translated from Arabic sources, covering diagnosis through urine analysis and pulse reading. A liturgical calendar lists saints' feast days. A necrology records 1,539 death dates of Bohemian clergy and nobility. And then there are the exorcism formulas. Folios 286 through 291 contain spells against disease and rituals for catching thieves. One surviving incantation against fever commands demons by name. Another describes procedures for identifying those who have stolen from the monastery. These were not considered dark magic in the medieval world. The Church taught that Christ granted his disciples power over demons, making exorcism a legitimate liturgical practice. Some of the formulas derive from Jewish sources, reflecting the religious cross-pollination common in medieval Bohemia. But here is what makes the Codex truly strange. It combines the sacred and the profane without apparent conflict. Holy Scripture sits beside exorcism rites. The Word of God shares pages with folk magic, and at the heart of it all, that massive portrait of Satan stares out at every reader. Medieval scholars could not understand why a monk creating a religious text would give such prominent space to the embodiment of evil. Some concluded the Codex must be a weapon, a tool designed to confuse and corrupt faith. Others proposed that the manuscript represented an attempt to map the entire spiritual battlefield, to understand both light and darkness in order to manipulate the war between them. But the greatest mystery of the Codex Gigas is not what it contains. The greatest mystery is what was deliberately removed, and what happened to those who tried to discover what was written on those missing pages. The missing pages. The Codex Gigas originally contained 320 leaves. Today, only 310 remain. 12 pages were deliberately cut from the manuscript at some point in its history, and the evidence of their removal is clearly visible in the binding structure. We know at least part of what one section contained. A note dated 1295 on the first folio records that when the monks of Podlegice pawned the manuscript to the Cistercian monastery at Sedlec, the rule of Saint Benedict was inscribed in the book. This text, the foundational guide to Benedictine monastic life, is no longer present, but the rule of Saint Benedict is brief. It would fill perhaps 2 pages at most. That leaves at least 20 pages of unknown content completely unaccounted for. Scholars have proposed various theories. Perhaps the missing pages contained additional monastic documents or local customary practices. Perhaps they held valuable illuminations that were removed and sold during times of financial hardship. Perhaps they contained material deemed theologically inappropriate by later authorities. The timing of the removal suggests it happened before 1648, when Swedish forces captured the manuscript. The 1295 note proves the rule of St. Benedict was present at that time. By the Swedish acquisition, it was already gone. The most likely suspect is Emperor Rudolf II, who possessed the Codex from 1594 until his death. Rudolf was known for his obsessive interest in the occult, alchemy, and esoteric knowledge. If those missing pages contained anything relating to supernatural practices, Rudolf would have had both the interest and the authority to remove them. The 2008 National Geographic investigation used ultraviolet fluorescence imaging to search for ghost images or impressions on the pages adjacent to the removed sections. They found nothing. Whatever those 12 pages contained has been completely lost to history. The darkening visible near the devil's portrait comes not from some supernatural cause, but from centuries of readers' hands turning to that famous spread. Even in death, the devil continues to draw attention. The missing pages were not the only mystery following the Codex through history. Everywhere this book traveled, Misfortune seemed to follow the curse that followed. The documented history of the Codex Gigas reads like a chronicle of disaster. In 1421, Hussite troops swept through Bohemia during the violent religious wars that tore the region apart. They conquered and burned the monastery at Podležice, where the Codex was created. Abbot Jan and 2 monks were captured, dragged to Rickenberg Castle, and burned alive. The monastery itself was reduced to ruins that stood until 1834, when they were finally removed and the ground ploughed over for farmland. Today, nothing remains but a small model in a local museum. The Codex survived because it had already been moved to the fortified monastery at Brumov for safekeeping. In 1594, Emperor Rudolf II acquired the manuscript and brought it to Prague Castle. Rudolf became increasingly obsessed with the book and with occult knowledge in general. His mental stability deteriorated until he was removed from power in 1612. He died in isolation shortly after. In 1648, during the final chaos of the 30 Years' War, Swedish troops looted Prague Castle and seized the Codex Gigas as a prize of war. The commander who captured it died within months under circumstances that contemporary accounts describe as peculiar and troubled by visions. In 1697, fire engulfed the Tre Krona Castle in Stockholm, where the Codex was stored. The blaze destroyed most of Sweden's cultural heritage. Of 24,500 printed works and 1,400 manuscripts held in the royal collection, only 6,000 books and 300 manuscripts survived. The Codex Gigas was saved when someone threw it from an upper-story window. According to an account written 50 years later, a bystander was injured when the 165-pound book struck him. The National Library now dismisses this as probably just a tall tale, but the fact remains that the Codex survived yet another fire that should have destroyed it. 800 years after its creation, the Codex Gigas remains fundamentally mysterious, and some believe its purpose has not yet been fulfilled. The Prophecy of 2033. One section of it describes a great dying from the East carried by merchants, written decades before the Black Death arrived in Europe. It describes symptoms matching bubonic plague with uncomfortable accuracy and specifies the plague will return in cycles until the world ends or humanity learns. Another passage describes Swedish wolves descending on Prague and taking treasures to the north. When written, Sweden was insignificant and not capable of threatening Central Europe. Yet, centuries later, Swedish forces would loot Prague and carry the Codex itself to Stockholm. But the prophecies that most disturb modern researchers are those that seem to reference our future. One cryptic section describes vessels of light carrying human thoughts across vast distances instantaneously. That sounds like telecommunications or the internet. Another mentions humanity claiming the power of the sun to destroy itself. That sounds like nuclear weapons. Most troubling is a passage near the manuscript's end describing a cosmic alignment, a conjunction of celestial bodies occurring only once every several thousand years. The text claims this alignment will weaken the barriers between what is and what should not be, a brief period when the gates may open and that which was banished might return. Astronomers who have examined this section have confirmed something chilling. The alignment described will occur in the year 2033. Instructions labelled "The Devil's Key" describe a ritual to deliberately open the gates during this alignment. It requires specific astronomical timing, rare substances, and the physical presence of the Codex Gigas itself. The monk's final marginal note was written in a shaky hand. Umbre observant et expectant et recordantur. The shadows watch and wait and remember. 800 years after its creation, the Codex Gigas remains fundamentally mysterious. It waits in its vault in Stockholm, watched over but not understood, feared but not destroyed. It survived the fire that consumed its birthplace. It survived war and looting and another fire that should have destroyed it. It survives because perhaps its time is not finished. Whatever purpose it was created to serve remains unfulfilled. So, what do you think is really trapped inside the Devil's Bible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.